Hi, I'm Rhiannon Faith, and I'm here to tell you a story. So today I happen to be in my car because my son has a baseball tournament, and I didn't want to miss the opportunity to share this that has been kind of heavy on my heart this weekend. So today is the 5th anniversary of my dad's passing, and I wasn't really thinking about it, and I guess I don't think about it most of the time, as in the anniversary of his death, because I prefer to think about his life instead and what it was like in celebrating him on his birthday and Father's Day and things like that. But I noticed this sort of heavy-heartedness and general heaviness as the weekend approached, and then I saw in my Facebook memories a note from 5 years ago on Friday when I had landed at the Portland airport where I was going up to visit my dad. So I just had this feeling that the end was near and I didn't have a lot of time left to wait to see him. And as I landed, my mom picked me up at the airport and said, well, your dad was actually just admitted to the ICU. He had been in the emergency department. And he's just been admitted to the ICU, which turned out to be the last place he was in this lifetime. And trying to figure out what exactly happened this time, because my dad had a lot of chronic medical issues due to lifestyle choices, and my mom was saying it was for low blood pressure, which of course is not a reason to get admitted to the ICU, but it was a whole combination of factors. They couldn't get his blood pressure raised and stabilized, and it was because both his kidneys and liver were failing. So he ended up passing it. Their diagnosis was hepatorenal failure. That doesn't matter at all. But I wasn't really consciously thinking about this on Friday, and then when I saw that reminder, it just kind of hit me. Of course, that's, this heaviness. And so I was trying to just move past it, but I felt so fatigued, physically, soul-crushingly tired. And Saturday was a little bit more of the same. We're just really, really exhausted, emotionally, physically, soul-tired. And saw another memory pop up in Facebook memories where I had sent out a prayer request, just asking, it seemed like the end was very near for my dad's time here on earth, but if people would pray that all the rest of the family that was intending to try and get there in time, that they would make it. And so thinking about that season and that time frame and what that was like, it was really challenging. And one of the things I've thought a lot about since my dad's passing was the complexity of grief, because when a person is alive, you can go through the varied emotions pretty easily of being angry with them or happy with them or frustrated. You get to actually experience all the ranges of emotions without feeling, for whatever reason, some extra layer of guilt or remorse, like how dare you be angry at someone who's passed away. And I think that's kind of unfair. So I've certainly seen many times over where a person passes away and the only thing anybody ever says is just, how wonderful they were and, what a good person and how they did all of these amazing things. And that may be true. And that probably is true. But, as people, we're more complex than any one thing. And so I recognize it for myself, because my dad was a complicated guy. On one hand, he was very, very generous and kind and considerate. And on the other hand, he was incredibly selfish and self-serving, and to the detriment of others around him, including family. And I used to believe it was only those that were outside of the barrier of his family that he would be selfish towards. But as I got older into adulthood, I was subjected to this as a recipient as well, more overtly than I had been probably, or I recognized as a child. And so I don't know if anybody needs to hear this or has gone through this similar situation, but I just felt like sharing from a very honest and vulnerable place. The different layers of grief are so interesting. I don't even know that interesting is the right word. Again, I adored my dad. I was definitely daddy's girl, but it wasn't just roses and sunshine. And I think it's a disservice to my grieving to not be honest about that. I have, and also I think sometimes people would hear, or maybe hear the stories about my dad and the things that he had done, some of which I'm going to share, that were so outlandish and ridiculous that they'd go, well, I mean, how do you love somebody who's done that or put you into that situation or whatever? But that, I think that's the complexity of unconditional love. Really loving someone is faults and all, but that doesn't mean unconditional exposure, right? There were different times and seasons of my life that I had to establish healthy boundaries to protect myself against some of that chaos or turmoil, torment, and frustration. So I just wanted to share a couple of stories about my dad today, this fifth anniversary of his passing, and just kind of the craziness that all the things that he's missing and missed out on. You know, he missed graduations, and my son is my youngest. He's graduating from or promoting from 8th grade this coming week, and you know, he didn't get to see him the last 5 years. These were big years. You know, he was 9 years old. My son was 9 years old when my dad passed away, and he definitely would have had a lot of fun with my dad. And if my dad had been around to see certain things, you know, my son playing baseball at the level that he does and the things that he does, and my oldest daughter having gotten married, and my middle daughter graduating from high school, and all of these different things that he wasn't around for because of the way he chose to live. Honestly, you know, I feel like he was skating on the verge of death, dancing that line for as close as he could for as long as he could until he tipped over the edge. And so there's some frustration with that, because I remember as a kid things that he would do. He drank a lot when I was younger, and in his drinking I would be so angry, like, why wouldn't you choose us? Why aren't we enough? And it had nothing to do with us. This was his battling of addiction that he did not fully overcome, you know, because he would just trade one addiction for another. There was this one season where he stopped drinking, and our house was suddenly filled with every single non-alcoholic beverage you could think of, like really everything, because he was so accustomed to that level of sugar in his system. And then just cases of candy bars, and he gained a ton of weight because he was just eating all of the sugar and sugary drinks because he was trying to replace the issues that he had, or that satisfaction he was gaining from alcohol with other non-alcoholic things. And there were a series of these addictive patterns throughout my childhood, which were interesting to observe and frustrating to live through, because those things often came at the expense of other reasonable things, like bills being paid, you know, the little stuff. But I was thinking about his grandiosity, and grandiosity is really like a great word for him, although he would use it often with others. Like, he would accuse me of being grandiose, and maybe I am, you know, to a certain degree. But it's learned behavior, I think. Okay, I have to own it for myself. My grandiosity is my own. But there was this one time, and I think like he liked telling this story, but from a different perspective, my perspective of this moment. So I was in high school, and somewhere between my middle sophomore year to, it was somewhere between my sophomore and junior year that this happened. My dad was drinking at the time. He was drinking a lot, and he and my mom had gotten into some sort of a fight. I don't know what about. My dad had gone into the bedroom and taken a bottle of pills, and he had already been drinking a lot. Like, my dad's tolerance for alcohol was extraordinary, and his taste for alcohol was top shelf. So it was a very expensive habit, and a dangerous one at that, right? So he had taken this whole bottle of pills. My mom found the bottle. It's like, what have you done? And he said, what do you care? You know, he's always very self-deprecating, and nobody really loves me, and just, you know, again, grandiose. And so he decided, my mom, you know, was calling the police. He talked about suicide a lot, killing himself. And, you know, there are lots of moments in my childhood where we went through that, where, you know, I remember like sitting huddled around him, begging him not to kill himself. And I remember those back when I was pretty small. So this was, you know, I'm probably 14 to 16, somewhere in that range during this particular occasion. So my boyfriend at the time happened to be at the house, And my dad runs from the house because he realizes my mom has called the authorities to try and, intervene and save him from himself. Well, my dad runs out of the house, and he is nowhere to be found. We lived at the time on 10.5 acres in a more rural part of San Marcos, California. And so there's lots of places he could have been hiding, and you wouldn't have found him. In short order, we had on our property, I don't even know how many fire trucks, and then there were a couple ambulances, tons of squad cars, a helicopter, and a search and rescue team of like 200. So, those are the kinds of things you really want as a teen girl. I mean, the mortification was relentless. And so these are the things that like my dad was subjecting us to, in his chaos and craziness and, in some sort of a manic phase. So as the police are questioning my mom, and I am just like dying on the inside. And thankfully my boyfriend at the time, he was very, he had a sort of similar chaotic childhood. He's the only person I knew who had also lived in motels at various times. So he was pretty, if he was judging, and I don't think that he was, but if he was judging, he kept it to himself, because there was just this like, all right, well, this is chaotic, but let's not dig into my closet of skeletons as well. So that was kind of cool. We ended up climbing out of my bedroom window and going into my favorite place of all time, my absolute favorite place, under this huge oak tree. My dad had installed a swing, a large porch swing style, and there was a grassy area under it. So I'd like taken a blanket out there, and we went and sat out on the porch swing as, just lights are flashing all around. You can hear the helicopter, and we're just chatting like it's a normal whatever day in the midst of this absolute chaos. So the cops and everybody are there for a good long while. He had to have been gone more than 2 hours, and they're searching and questioning my mom. At one point, they wanted to start taking his alcohol as confiscated as evidence. Like, evidence of what? Self-destruction? You can't take his alcohol. He'll absolutely unravel. And honestly, it was a lot of expensive alcohol, so there's no way. Like, even though I didn't love that my dad was a drinker, I know he would unravel if he had to replace all of that, so I was not going to let that happen. And at some point, my dad just, walks in the back door, which we barely ever used, but he just walks in the back door, sits on the couch like, are you guys looking for me? It was so ridiculous. Okay, so now fast forward, my dad, I think, ends up being hospitalized for a bit to get his psychiatric issues under control. And he comes home, and I wouldn't say it was like time enough where we were all less scarred by his behavior that he shared the story of what he was doing when he was out there. Probably not, because that was really my dad's style, to wait until we had recovered, because there was no recovery. It was just one insane incident after another, and then here we are. So he would tell us, he went on to tell us that he was out in the fields at one point, and he was like army crawling through an irrigation ditch. Great dad. And so he's watching the helicopters, and he's like intentionally trying to evade all these people who are looking for him. He's making it a game. Like, this Looney Tune has gone out. Again, keep in mind, now, I don't know, he might not have actually taken all the pills that he told my mom. I could see him doing that just for, again, shock factor. Telling her he took them and not having actually taken them. But also, I could see him taking it and it having little to no effect, because he had subjected his body to a lot of substances, pills-wise, and overuse of medication and alcohol for many years. So his tolerance was pretty high. So either one could be true. However, he was apparently using this as some, wartime reenactment where he's crawling through, army crawl through an irrigation tube at one point, watching for the helicopter, evading the rescue teams, the dogs are out, and all of this stuff. I mean, who does that? And he's telling it to us with this pride of having escaped their notice, and how boastful it was, in a very boastful way, sharing that he had just snuck back in the house and no one had even noticed. Those cops are idiots. They didn't find me. And I thought, literally missed the point. Okay, what are you doing? Why did you have to do all of this? And so on one hand, he would do stuff like that. And on the other hand, he was like fiercely protective. So there was this one occasion when I was young. We lived in Knoxville, Tennessee, and we had just left a football game at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. My mom was holding my sister's hand and my dad was holding my hand. That was pretty much always how it was. I always had my dad's hand and my mom always had my sister's hand. We were walking and my dad always walked in front and always with himself between us and whatever chaos. So if he was walking with my mom, she would be on the inside. But because we were crossing the street, he was with the cars and I was on the outside, closer to the intersection, but you know, cars might keep going. Well, that's what happened, except not to us, to my mom. So there was this very, very nice, very new red Corvette that came up on the line and went past the line and bumped into my mom. Now again, my mom is holding my sister's hand, so the car bumps my mom. It wasn't going fast, but he was like moving ahead in the light and just rolled into her. And my mom was startled and was like, "Oh my gosh, you hit me!" And my dad spun around with me still locked into his hand, and Hulk smashed the middle of this person's Corvette, like such a dent. And my dad was a big guy. Okay, he was 6'5". At the time, he was in very, very good shape. He would have been like 280 to 310, but muscle, and like, yikes. Okay, stay in your car. So the guy starts to get out of his car, like instinctually he's gonna, you know, solve this problem, and looks at my dad and is like, you know, one second thought. Closes and locks the doors. And I was like, holy moly. And then he grabbed my mom and my sister and just kind of like, you know, spun them into him, and we walked off. And he didn't think a second about it. No remorse, no crap, I just ruined that guy's car. The look on his face was like, you're lucky I don't kill you for hurting my wife or my daughter, you know. And my sister was fine, my mom was fine. It really just bumped her leg. We moved about business, but I was the one who, you know, I was my dad's kind of, I think, emotional security blanket while I was in the house. And I think he did the same to my sister after I moved out, and then subsequently to my brother after my sister moved out. But for, you know, a good long stretch there, because my sister was on the scene at that point, I would be his rein it back in. So I was hugging his hand tight, like, daddy, calm down, you know. And I had lots of those conversations with my dad as a child, you know, it's okay, dad, it's okay, and comforting him, you know, which isn't really the responsibility a child should have to undertake or even feel the urgency to overtake. But that was our dynamic. And, you know, again, he did lots of really wonderful things, but he also did these super crazy things that are, you know, kind of hard to reconcile. And so again, you know, I speak very fondly of my dad in general, because I don't think everybody can appreciate or understand. I have gone through a process of coming to terms with my dad, you know, and his infallibility as a person, or his fallibility as a person, and his inability in all the situations I would have preferred to love me in a way that met my needs. So there were lots of times I would have preferred he had just focused on what we needed as a family, like bills to be paid and a reliable roof over our head. And instead he was lost in his own mind, really, you know, hurts of the past and turmoil and creating new turmoil and living pridefully. And so I wish he could have overcome that in this life, but I know that he has in perfection with Christ. But I think it's important, it's been important for me to go through a process of seeing the whole story again and being honest with myself about the whole story, because I think it leaves wounds that are unhealed, and you don't necessarily need the other person there to heal those wounds, although that can be cathartic and helpful if they're there. But if I was to deny the aspects of the full color and picture of who my dad was as a person, I'd miss out on the validation of my own recollection of those things. And it's okay for me to equally love my dad for all the lovely things that were about him and be frustrated with him even now, looking back as a parent, on things that he chose to do that didn't prioritize us before himself. And so I just share that because, again, it's lots of complicated emotions in grief. And there are times that I have in this grief journey, just been absolutely wrecked. There are certain songs that I hear, like Eric Johnson's Cliffs of Dover. He would play that a lot on Saturday mornings when it was time to clean the house. He was like a big fan of music, all genres, and he would just blast it. And that was wake up time, it's time to clean. And he was super neurotic about cleaning. I mean, really neurotic. It's 2 a.m. and there's a speck of dust on the floor. Who cares that we're in the second story apartment? It's time to vacuum. I mean, we've just had to have been the worst neighbors ever. I would hate people living above me who behave that way. But my dad kind of lived of the mindset, what are you going to do about it? You going to come and tell me not to vacuum the floor? And honestly, there weren't a lot of people who would have dared. The audacity. But again, he was really, he's so smart, which he used to his advantage, sometimes to, oftentimes to manipulate and whatever. But we'd have these very cool intellectual conversations or deep dives into music. He loved to watch war reenactments. We watched a lot of Victory at Sea. When I was a kid, we would borrow those VHS from the library or listen to the records. And it was really cool, sharing in all those moments. And when I was younger, really anything my dad would be doing, I was doing with him. I was kind of a shadow in that. So if he was on the job site, he was an architect and had a construction firm at one point, but he did architecture and construction my whole life in some capacity or another. And so the smell of fresh cut, slightly wet wood, reminds me of my dad. And there are all these different memories that are like that, like the hot blue glue for plumbing totally reminds me of my dad, and doing projects with him, and home renovations or gardening. Oh my gosh, we took on this massive project of refinishing the floors at the house where he went on his wild escapade through the drainage ditches and evading all of the search and rescue. And he did this beautiful mosaic tiled fireplace. The old fireplace was hideous rock, and he designed this whole thing. And so there I was, painstakingly, with these 1x1 tiles, and then this master design he had developed, and putting all the pieces together with him. So any of those projects, I was along for the ride, and I learned lots of really, really valuable things about construction and design, and taking care of things for myself, because my dad took me along for all of those adventures, and I learned all of that stuff with him. But so I, again, super grateful for that. And I guess also with all of this, it reminds me, I hope that my kids, someday when I pass away, they will have more happy memories than frustrating ones. But I hope that they will feel free to be honest with themselves and know that they're not dishonoring me by remembering also the frustrating and disappointing things that I had done through their childhood or adulthood. And I hope they're few and far between. But I also hope they feel free, that there's enough emotional stability and safety in our relationship where they can share those things with me. Because as I was reflecting on this, and I talked to my sister a bit about it, my dad would take ownership of things, right? About his bad behavior in one way or another, but only if he brought it up. So if he had a time of self-reflection and came to one of us or collectively and shared, I did this thing or that thing that was really, that was unfair to you guys, and as I look back, I think I should have done something differently. Those times he would take full ownership, and he would really be a part of the conversation, and he would hear from us what we had to say. But if we were to, unsolicited, share with him some way that he hurt us, I mean, the narcissistic switch would flip, and it would be, turned around on us. Well, I'm sorry, I'm just the worst dad that ever was. And so, human nature, not everybody's keen on accountability across the board, but, he had these very polarizing positions on certain things, as far as, on one hand, just this very loving and very generous man, and then on the other hand, shenanigans. because it's all shenanigans, but to different degrees and levels. So anyways, I just thought I would share. And, you know, again, in global perspective, I loved my dad very much, and I'm blessed to have been his daughter, and grateful for all the years that I did get to have him here on this earth, and disappointed that there weren't more, but grateful just the same. So thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed. Come back again. I'll tell you another story. Thanks.